Hello and welcome to Penguin TV. It is recorded by George Ephelis, aka Whiffy Penguin, and you can follow me on Twitter at Whiffy Penguin. Penguin TV is hosted by PureMTGO.com and sponsored by MTGOTraders.com. Get an 8% discount off all orders over $50 when paying with PayPal or credit card. And you can check out CapeFearGames.com and get an extra 20% off when trading paper for digital. Enjoy the videos. Hello and welcome to a different Penguin TV. This week we are going to be talking about Classic as a format and how to approach it. A lot of people who watch these videos either know what's going on explicitly or have no real idea, and they're just watching it because they enjoy watching Magic. But I thought that it would be a good idea to kind of go over the pillars of the format, as it were, and show people, you know, the gears of Classic decks and how the format actually works. This will help people get a better understanding of what's going on in the format, and how to try to approach building rogue decks for it. Because I notice a lot of people in the DEs when they fire, there's usually 2 to 4 people who are playing decks that are almost Classic viable. They're not quite there. And I thought that, you know, maybe we could get a little bit more knowledge out there. So I'm going to start off with the first pillar of the format, which is Mishas Workshop. So workshop decks are almost nearly mono brown. Some splash blue or black for Tinker and Tutors. The versions that I will show you are going to be monocolored or no-colored. But let's start off. So, Mishas Workshop. The reason that Mishas Workshop works is because of this land right here that will give you 3 mana to play an artifact spell. And it just so happens that almost every card in the deck is an artifact if it's not a land. This particular build that I've got up on the screen does have 2 non-artifact cards. But, so, we've got Mishas Workshop, and the reason it's good is because it helps power out all of these spheres, which will slow down the game for your opponents. The spheres, these 8 guys, 9, and these 4, are all always in Workshop decks, unless the metagame demands a change, such as running no Thorn of Amethyst in the main deck if you expect a lot of fish. But the other reason that Workshop decks are so prevalent is Metalworker. This guy right here. Turn 1 Mishas Workshop into a Metalworker will allow you to dump your entire hand on the second turn. Usually, if you've got the right cards in your hand, you will usually lock out the game on your second turn. There are not many decks that can beat, you know, +3 to all of their spells by turn 2, especially if the other deck is on the draw. If Workshop's on the play, it's really tough. So, this deck ends up winning, this particular deck ends up winning with Metalworker and Staff of Domination. With 3 artifacts in your hand, a Metalworker and a Staff on the table, you can create infinite mana, draw infinite cards, and, you know, just have your way with the opponent. So what this deck would seek to do is get down a fast Metalworker and a fast Staff, draw out most of their entire deck. You've got infinite mana, so you just play, you know, all of your spheres, and then you lay out a couple of beaters. And there's not much that they can do if you pass the turn to them and there are 7 spheres on the table and 4 lodestone golems. There's not much that they can do to beat that. There are a couple of Karn Liberateds in this deck. I've been tooling around with this build a little bit in between other decks that I play, and so far Karn has not come up, but I really like him with Metalworker, and I really like that he is just the bee's knees versus everything. Fish is the only deck that can actually remove this guy consistently. Every other deck, if you can actually resolve Karn, they should be scooping. He removes Oath of Druids, he removes Blightsteel, and, you know, heaven forbid if you actually get to ultimate with him, and you went about, you know, exiling some spheres or some lands from the opponent. And then you restart the game with like 3 lands and a sphere on the table and a draw 7. Seems pretty good. This deck also maximizes the Wasteland count. I'm going to just call it Virtual Wastelands. It's got all 4 Ghost Quarters, all 4 Wastelands, and a Strip Mine. So this is one way to build a workshop deck. Another way would be to take a page from one of my videos from a few weeks ago and run workshops with null rods to help shut down the rest of the format. If you're interested in this deck, you can watch a lot more of it in detail from my Penguin TV a few weeks ago called Null Workshops, or Null Rod Shops, I believe. But again, this deck seeks to just get a whole bunch of spheres on the table and win with some fatties, or with Wasteland Recursion and just lock them out of the game. Another version that some people run is the Kuldotha Forgemaster variant. Converted mana cost. This variant runs Forgemaster, a bunch of Voltaic Keys, and the Time Vault combo. And basically, oh, it also has a Helm of Obedience, Leyline of the Void sub-combo. So basically what this deck is trying to accomplish is a very fast combo win, with either a Leyline of the Void in your opening hand, or using Forgemaster to fetch out a Time Vault, and playing one of your many Voltaic Keys. This deck, as I said, does not run Thorn of Amethyst. This is one of the very few decks that does not run 13 spheres. The reason for it is that I believe when this deck was doing well, Fish was also doing very well, and Fish just gets around Thorn of Amethyst. It doesn't do much to Fish at all. A bonus of this deck is a great Game 1 against Dredge with the Leyline of the Voids in the main deck, and the Serum Powders with added consistency to make sure you find either Leyline or Mishas Workshop in your opening hand. It's got a little bit of fat because it does have extra Grim Monoliths, and it's got Metalworkers and Voltaic Keys, so it can cast out these fat spells. This is a few months old, so it does not have the new Kid on the Block, Phyrexian Metamorph, which I believe is an excellent card, and should be in every shop deck. But that is workshops on a whole. There's also a version running around that has some Underground Seas and some fetch lands, and it runs Tinker and like Vampiric Tutor and Demonic Tutor. There are versions that run Chalice of the Void. But, so, with Workshop, the way to win with it, as I said, is to try and just lock out your opponent with spheres, and then depending on your build, you go from there. But the ideal opening hand is either a sphere, a Trinisphere, a Metalworker, or a Lodestone Golem. And what this does is just puts an immense amount of pressure on the opponent. They need spot removal or they need force of will. Speaking of spot removal or force of will, the best ways to combat the brown menace, so to speak, is to either be running blue with access to force of will and spell snare and possibly steel sabotage to stop the spheres and the Metalworkers from hitting the table in the first place. Another good way to go about this is to overload on Hurkyl's Recalls. Hurkyl's Recall for 2 mana will return the Workshop player's entire non-land board to their hand. And what that does, what you would do is you would set up an end of turn scenario where you can actually cast Hurkyl's Recall, and it gets fishy. Hurkyl's Recall costs 2, and if you don't have some artifact mana or some dark rituals lying around, you may not be able to cast Hurkyl's Recall as early as turn 3 or 4. But so the ideal scenario is to Hurkyl's Recall their hand or their board back into their hand, and then you get at least one full turn of unmolested action. And this is where you would apply your game plan, whether it be Oath of Druids or Gush or Lion's Eye Diamond or heck even Fish. The actual best way to beat workshops is fish decks. They are built to prey on the actual archetype. They run Wastelands, they run lots of spot removal, and they run creatures, which is something that workshop decks, and classic decks as a whole, aren't truly prepared for. There aren't a lot of decks that run main deck creature removal, or ways to even, deal with creatures, whether it be their own creatures. So the fish decks have a niche in the format, and our buddy Timmons, who is a classic stalwart, he has carved his way into first place in the Classic Player of the Year race based on the back of savannas and tropical islands. So there's fish, and then the other way is to just overload on spot removal. Nature's Claim, Ancient Grudge, both of these cards are really good at stopping workshop decks. If you're playing an Oath of Druids build, you should probably be running at least 2 Ancient Grudges in the main deck, and then possibly another 2 in your sideboard. Getting up to 2 mana for Chalice of the Void is a little hairy for Workshop to do in the early game, especially since Oath decks have access to Nature's Claim, Spell Pierce, and Force of Will, and some decks even have access to Mana Drain. The last way to beat a workshop deck is to race it. There are some decks who can actually win on the play turn 1 or on the play turn 2, depending on what the opponent throws out. For instance, an LED deck, LED is short for Lion's Eye Diamond. If workshop is on the play and they run out of Metalworker, you still have a full turn without them, stopping you from casting spells. If you're on the play and they run out of Metalworker, chances are you win the game with Lion's Eye Diamond. They have no disruption besides sphere effects, and those sphere effects, if they're not down on the table, they're not going to stop the fastest deck from winning. So yeah, that would be the workshop variant. Spheres, Wastelands, and Fatties. That's how it rolls. Some versions combo out, some versions are straight lockdown. A card that no one is playing, and the reason may be the lack of Tanglewire, is Smokestack. In Vintage, Smokestack is a real card, but Vintage also has access to Tanglewire, which is Smokestack's best friend. In Classic, Smokestack appears in some sideboards. It appears as a 1 or 2 of in some decks, but it's generally regarded as an anomaly. Well, this was Workshop. Variants and builds, how to beat and play them. And I will head on to the next deck archetype. Thanks.